47 acres of diddly squat sat underwater for 3 consecutive winters. The drainage consultants came. They looked, they wrote reports. They recommended solutions that cost more than the land had earned in 2 years and fixed almost nothing. Everyone assumed it was the land. They were wrong. It was an opportunity worth millions. And the people who should have spotted it first spent Senbai Sishiyimbang on reports telling Jeremy Clarkson there was nothing to be done, because this was never a waterlogging problem. It was the gap in British agricultural drainage engineering that nobody had bothered to close since Iten Jobai Bashitsi. And by the end of this, the only question you'll have is why it took a television presenter from Doncaster to find it. Subscribe now if you haven't already, because this is the one most people who follow this story have completely missed. Diddly Squat sits on the Cotswold limestone plateau above Chipping Norton. The soil is classified as Sherborne series, shallow, flinty, and notoriously hostile to conventional drainage system. Water doesn't drain downward cleanly. It moves laterally through fissures in the stone beneath and resurfaces in entirely unpredictable locations. Every traditional mole drain, every French drain, every ceramic pipe solution installed at Diddly Squat either silted up within 18 months or redirected water somewhere equally catastrophic. Gerald Cooper, the local farmer who became Clarkson's most trusted advisor in the early seasons, had worked Cotswold ground his entire life. He knew what the land did. What he didn't know, what nobody in the local agricultural community had formally solved, was why the standard drainage catalog kept failing specifically on this limestone shelf formation. They'd accepted it as a given. A condition of the geography, something you managed, not something you fixed. Clarkson was not inclined to accept conditions. This is the part that changes everything, and almost nobody reported it. What happened between Series 1 and Series 2 of Clarkson's farm wasn't just a television production gap. Inside that gap, a small team working directly with Diddly Squat's ground conditions developed a modified ring drainage insert, a relatively simple physical component that addresses the specific failure mode of standard drainage installations on fractured limestone substrates. Not a digital product, not a brand extension. A physical, manufacturable, patentable piece of agricultural engineering. It was never a hobby project. It was a necessity that became an invention. And the drainage industry, which had 40 years to solve this, and hadn't suddenly had a problem. Here is what most people who cover Clarkson's farm never look at. The business at Diddly Squat is not one business. It is not even 3 businesses. When you map the legal entities surrounding the Diddly Squat operation, the farm trading company, the production company, the licensing arrangements, the Hawkstone brewery structure, the pub entity, there is a separate intellectual property holding structure that has attracted almost zero journalistic attention. That structure exists for a reason. Intellectual property doesn't get its own legal home unless someone intends to do something serious with it. Agricultural engineers who have reviewed the drainage insert concept, and several have, because Clarkson discussed it publicly in a Launtening Arsesen interview that most entertainment journalists skipped entirely, have placed an indicative commercial valuation on the underlying innovation at a proxy. Mately, Faye Ardernsen million in licensing potential across the UK drainage product market alone. Scale that across comparable limestone geology in France, Germany, and the American Midwest, and the number climbs considerably further. Nobody laughed at this one. Jeremy Charles Robert Clarkson, the son of a Paddington Bear toy salesman from Doncaster, who became the most watched motoring journalist in television history, did not set out to become an agricultural inventor. He set out to farm wheat and make a television program about failing to farm wheat. What he accidentally built instead through genuine incompetence meeting genuine necessity was a problem. Solving engine that has now produced at least one commercially viable innovation that his own farm generated the testing ground for. That is not farming. That is applied research. The distinction matters enormously. Kaleb Cooper, who was already working at Diddly Squat when Clarkson bought the land in 2008, and who has since become arguably the most recognized young farmer in British television history, understood the drainage problem intimately before Clarkson arrived. He'd worked around it for years, using inherited techniques. What he couldn't do, and what the arrival of a television production budget and a spectacularly impatient employer made suddenly possible, was throw serious resources at actually solving it rather than simply managing it. The combination of Kaleb's ground-level knowledge and Clarkson's pathological refusal to accept. That is just how it is as an answer produce something neither would have produced alone. You cannot manufacture that dynamic. You can only stumble into it and then have the sense to pay attention. The drainage advisory bodies that wrote those initial reports, the ones that charged £340 and recommended conventional solutions on unconventional ground, represent a broader failure within British agricultural consultants. They are calibrated to apply known solutions to known problems. They are not structured to recognize when a problem is actually a gap in the solution catalog itself. That gap recognition requires someone who doesn't know enough to accept the existing answer as final. Clarkson didn't know enough. That was the asset. His ignorance of established agricultural convention was, for once, the most valuable thing in the room. The drainage insert itself, and this is the detail that separates a good business story from a genuinely important one, addresses a problem shared by an estimated 340,000 hectares of limestone-underlain agricultural land in England and Wales alone. The Cotswolds are the most visible example, but nowhere near the only one. The Lincolnshire Wolds, parts of the Yorkshire Dales, large sections of the Mendips, all of them carry the same fractured substrate drainage failure profile. All of them have farmers spending money on solutions that partially work and then silt up. A manufacturable insert that solves this, at a price point accessible to working farms rather than only large estates, doesn't capture a niche market. It captures a structural gap that has been bleeding money out of British agriculture quietly for decades. The British agricultural drainage market is valued at approximately £890 million annually. It is dominated by a small number of established manufacturers who sell essentially the same product ranges they sold in the 1990s. The category has seen almost no genuine innovation since the introduction of corrugated plastic land drain pipe replaced ceramic pipes in the 1980s. It is, in the language of technology investment, a market ripe for disruption, not by a startup with venture capital, but by a working farm that accidentally became a testing ground for the one solution the market needed and didn't have. Carlsberg looked at Hawkstone and offered £50 million. They saw a beer brand. What they missed was that Diddley Squat had already demonstrated it could generate intellectual property with commercial value well beyond the farm gate. A drainage product is less glamorous than a brewery. It is considerably more defensible as a business asset. Glamour fades, utility compounds. Now consider what Clarkson's Farm, the television series, actually is. From a purely commercial perspective, when you strip away the entertainment framing entirely, it is a fully funded, Amazon-financed research and development environment operating on 1,000 acres of genuinely difficult agricultural land. Amazon pays an estimated £10 to £12 million per year for the right to document whatever happens on that land. What happens on that land? The genuine problems, the genuine failures, the genuine attempts to find solutions generates intellectual property as a byproduct. The farm shop generates revenue. Hawkstone generates revenue. The pub generates revenue. The IP pipeline generates something different. It generates assets. The Series 3 moment, where Clarkson is shown physically testing drainage configurations, with his team received approximately 40 seconds of screen time. 40 seconds. The episode was watched by an estimated 6 million households in its first week. Nobody wrote about the drainage testing. Every publication wrote about the argument with the planning officer. The planning officer is not the story he never was. The real question, the one nobody in British agricultural media has answered clearly, is how many other innovations have been generated by a farm that has now been operating as a fully funded, high-dan attention problem to solving environment for 6 consecutive years? The answer is almost certainly more than one. Gerald Cooper spent 50 years farming Cotswold ground and solved its problems through experience, patience, and ancestral knowledge passed down through generations of local farmers. That knowledge is irreplaceable, but it is not scalable. It cannot be packaged, licensed, or distributed to the sense other hectares facing the same substrate. It lives in one man's understanding of one set of fields. What the Diddley Squat drainage insert does, if it reaches commercial production, and the IP structure suggests that is the intention, is take that inherited knowledge, formalize it into a manufacturable product, and make it available to every farm on every limestone shelf in the country. Gerald Cooper's lifetime of knowledge. One product. Distributed nationally. That is not farming. That is something else entirely. And the industry most threatened by it isn't agriculture. It is the drainage consultancy sector that wrote those early reports and charged Senbai Sisser Yungbong for the privilege of getting it wrong. Stand back. Look at the full picture. Clarkson buys 10 acres of difficult Cotswold land in Nyantan Ba for Feidiu Yingli Lion. Amazon pays 10英镑 to 1英镑 2英里 annually to document his genuine attempts to farm it. The farm shop turns 44000 英镑 in initial assets into an estimated 2英里 Laoyan annual revenue. Hawkstone Brewery reaches 21.10 million in annual revenue with a 7英镑 5英里 lion valuation after Carlsberg's 5英镑 0英里 lion offer is rejected. The Farmer's Dog Pub employs Yelsilio people, and somewhere inside the IP holding structure that attracts almost no press coverage, a drainage insert developed from 6 years of failed conventional solutions on fractured limestone sits with an indicative valuation of 10 million in UK licensing potential alone. Every single one of those numbers came from the same source, one farm. One genuine commitment to solving real problem. One camera pointing at the process. The council thought they were the regulatory authority. They were providing the content that made the farm globally famous. The drainage advisors thought they were closing the case on an unfixable problem. They were freeing the team to invent the solution the market had been waiting for. The entertainment industry thought they were funding a television program about a man who can't grow wheat. They were funding a research and development operation that generates assets. The failure is the product. Every flooded field, every rejected planning application, every 144 pounds year, end profit statement was building something. The viewers saw entertainment. The balance sheet saw infrastructure. It is not a farm. It is a flywheel, and it has been spinning for 6 years. What remains genuinely uncertain, and this matters because honest analysis requires acknowledging it, is timeline. Bringing an agricultural product to commercial manufacture involves regulatory testing, distribution agreements, and a manufacturing partner willing to commit to a category that has seen almost no innovation in 30 years. Those conversations take time. They are not televised. They happen in rooms that cameras are not invited into. The IP may sit in its holding structure for another 2 years before it reaches market. It may already have a manufacturing partner that hasn't been announced. The honest answer is that the public information available doesn't resolve this yet. What the public information does confirm is that the structure exists. The valuation conversations have happened, and the farm that everyone assumed was a money-losing television project has been quietly building an asset portfolio that most agricultural businesses 5 times its size haven't matched. Lisa Hogan, Clarkson's partner, once said that the planning restrictions, forcing them to source within 16 miles, were the best thing that ever happened to them. They discovered suppliers and relationships they'd never have found otherwise. She understands something that most people watching from the outside have only recently begun to grasp. Every constraint at Diddley Squat has produced a corresponding asset. Every obstacle has produced a corresponding innovation. Every expert who said it couldn't be done created the conditions under which it got done differently. That is the actual story of Clarkson's Farm, not the celebrity. Not the arguments, not the queues outside a farm shop in the Cotswolds on a rainy Saturday morning. Though those queues are real, and they matter. The story is that a 1,000-acre farm on difficult limestone ground has become something British agriculture has never quite produced before. A business that gets more valuable every time something goes wrong. If you found this one genuinely useful, and I hope you have, do subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we're covering the parts of this story that most channels aren't looking at. I'd love to know, did you already know the IP side of this operation existed? Or was this the first you'd heard of it? Drop it in the comments below. And the video on your screen right now covers the Hawkstone valuation story in detail, including the number that made Carlsberg walk away from the table. Thank you as always for watching.